Minutes before 9 o'clock. It is Friday, September 6, 2013. We've got NewsBites for you. This is the show that puts the news back in news talk. This is your opportunity to spend 20 minutes with your radio. Grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and listen to the news stories that are making the world spin today. The rest of the news talk world will be talking about these stories. We'll talk about them briefly. We do talk about them at length, by the way, later on in the morning sometimes. It depends if we have an expert on or not. Right now we have the stories. We'll bring them to you, and Rob and I go back and forth, and we will, when we have the information, give you the resource that we used, and we use the different resources that we subscribe to here at WOCA, The Source. The first one comes, I'm not sure where it comes from. Senators voting Wednesday to authorize a Syria strike received an on average 83% more campaign financing from defense contractors than lawmakers voting against the war. Voting against war. Overall, political action committees and employees from defense and intelligence firms such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, United Technologies, Honeywell International, and others ponied up $1,006,887 to the 17 members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who voted yes or no on the authorization Wednesday, according to an analysis by MapLight, the Berkeley-based nonprofit that performed the inquiry. Wow, that's pretty revealing.
On the eve of the Jewish New Year, an unexpected tweet came from the account generally believed to be run by the new Iranian President Hassan Rouhani or members of his campaign team. It was a Rosh Hashanah greeting to Jews, especially the Iranian ones. Rouhani's purported words flummoxed the Twitter sphere, and not just because the leader of an Islamic country seemed to be sending blessings to Jews. The tweet specifically mentions Iranian Jews, a community that has largely slipped under the radar in the West. Though it's rarely in the news, Iran has had a vibrant Jewish community for centuries. The city of Hamadan is home to the purported burial site of Esther and Mordechai, key figures in the Jewish story of Purim. Though their shrine is generally well preserved, it has faced attacks recently.
The next story is from Fox News. The Coptic Orthodox priest would only talk to his visitor after hiding from the watchful eyes of the bearded Muslim outside who sported a pistol bulging from under his robe. So Father Ioannis moved behind a wall in the charred skeleton of an ancient monastery to describe how it was torched and then looted when they took over his southern Egyptian town following the ouster of the country's president. The fire in the monastery burned intermittently for 3 days. The looting continued for a week. At the end, not a wire or an electric switch was left, according to the report from the Associated Press. The monastery's 1,600-year-old underground chapel was stripped of ancient icons, and the ground was dug up and on the belief that a treasure was buried there. A town of some 120,000, including 20,000 Christians, Dalga has been outside government control since hardline supporters of the Islamist Mohammed Morsi drove out police and occupied their station on July 3rd, the day Egypt's military chief removed the president in a popularly supported coup. The takeover of the town in Egypt leaves Christians in fear. It was the whole point of that story, by the way.
And this is a story that you and I were speaking about yesterday, just off the cuff, wondering when the next moon launch would be. Well, it's happening. It's happening this evening at 11:27 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 0327 Greenwich Mean Time. NASA's newest space probe has its eye on the moon, and the weather couldn't look finer for the planned Friday night launch. In a twist, NASA is launching this new moonshot from Virginia to investigate a long-standing mystery behind lunar dust. NASA's Lunar Atmosphere and Dust Environmental Explorer is the name of the spacecraft, and it is slated to launch toward the moon this evening. The mission will blast off atop a brand new Minotaur 5 rocket, the debut mission for the Orbital Sciences Corporation booster. Weather forecasts look pristine for the Friday night launch. There is a near-perfect 95% chance of good weather over the launch pad right at NASA's Wallops Flight Facility on Wallops Island, Virginia. Depending on local weather conditions, the nighttime launch could be visible to millions of observers up and down the U.S. East Coast.
Yeah, so you can keep an eye on the sky this evening. I guess you would look to the north if it's in Virginia, right?
Yep, 11:27 p.m.
Well, hope we see it. It's disappointing it's not happening here in Florida.
Yeah.
All right, next story. Lawmakers were shown a gruesome video depicting dozens of people killed by nerve gas as part of a classified closed-door briefing yesterday, laying out the Obama administration's case for action against Syrian President Bashar Assad. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairwoman Dianne Feinstein, the Democrat from California, said the images, a grim CIA meets CSI presentation, aimed to convince beyond a shadow of a doubt that Assad bloodlessly killed more than 1,400 people, including over 400 children, is what other members of Congress need to see if they're to be persuaded to vote to authorize strikes designed to punish Assad and deter him from using chemical weapons again. What a mess.
Texas health officials are recommending that state residents make sure they're vaccinated against pertussis, a sometimes fatal disease that is on track to sicken more Texans this year than at any other time in decades. Here's a quote from Dr. Carol J. Baker, professor of pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine. She's also the executive director of the Center for Vaccine Awareness in Research at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. If we continue to have cases in Texas at the rate we've had them so far this year, we'll have more cases than has been reported for the last 50 years. The threat grows when one considers that scientists estimate 10 cases of pertussis, popularly known as whooping cough, occur for every one that is reported. We're clearly having an epidemic. It could spread.
George Zimmerman's wife has filed for divorce. She was on Good Morning America this morning talking about her decision to file for divorce from George Zimmerman, who was acquitted in the death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin, as you know. Shelley Zimmerman said she is left with a shattered life. She said she never really knew him at all. She said, I stood by my husband through everything, and I kind of feel like he left me with a bunch of broken glass that I'm supposed to now assemble and make a life. It's just heartbreaking, she said. Shelley Zimmerman is 26 years old. She stood by her husband throughout the ordeal that began on February 26 of last year when her husband shot and killed the unarmed teenager and came to an end when the Florida jury acquitted him of murder in July. But less than 2 months later, she filed for divorce. She says, I have a selfish husband, and I think George is all about George.
Good for her. The number of freight trains carrying out oil across America has soared in the past 5 years, but federal officials warn that the massive steel tank cars that carry most of that oil through towns and past schools, the same cars that exploded in Quebec this summer, killing 47 people, may be unsafe and prone to rupture. The clock is ticking. It's a quote from Jim Airy, fire chief of the Chicago suburb of Barrington, Illinois, where the number of trains that rumble across Main Street has grown from 5 a day to nearly 1 an hour. As long as these rail cars are out there and they're being used, potential exists for a major disaster.
An Arizona woman who has spent more than 2 decades on death row after being convicted of having her 4-year-old son killed for an insurance payout is expected to be released on Friday, that's today, while she awaits a retrial of the case that made her one of the state's most reviled inmates. Judge Rosa Moros of Maricopa County Superior Court set Deborah Milkey's bond at $250,000 a day earlier, saying there's no direct evidence linking her to her son's death other than a purported confession to a detective, and the judge said the validity of that confession is in doubt. Sheriff Joe Arpaio said Milkey would probably be released on Friday, which is today. If she is freed, Milkey's lawyers have said she plans to stay at home. at a home that supporters bought for her in the Phoenix area. She has been imprisoned since 1990. Milky was a 25-year-old insurance company clerk when her son was killed. Now she's 49 years old. She has maintained her innocence the entire time, saying she had nothing to do with the slaying. Maricopa County prosecutors are still seeking the death penalty against Milky at her retrial, tentatively set for September 30th, and her alleged confession is at the heart of the case against her. The judge scheduled a September 23rd hearing on the defense's request to prohibit the prosecution from using the confession during the retrial.
U.S. United Nations Ambassador Samantha Power, a longtime passionate advocate for humanitarian intervention, is playing a spirited role at UN headquarters in a bid to convince Security Council members about the need for a United States strike on Syria. On yesterday, President Obama arrived at the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg. She held a briefing at the U.S. mission with UN Security Council member nations, along with some other interested states, to give them an unclassified briefing on the U.S. intelligence regarding the responsibility of the government of Bashar al-Assad in the chemical weapons attack in a Damascus suburb on August the 21st. She is quoted as saying to CBS News, "We in the U.S. agree that at times like this, the Security Council should live up to its obligations and act."
You're listening to WOCA, The Source. This is the segment of the morning show that we call NewsBites. We take the biggest, freshest news from the different agencies we subscribe to. We deliver them to you abbreviated, very succinct, very cut to the chase, and we serve them bite-sized. The next story: the number of freight trains carrying oil across America has soared in the past 5 years, but federal officials warn that the massive steel tank cars that carry most of that oil through towns and past schools, the same cars that exploded in Quebec this summer. Oh, is that the story you just read?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay. We did have that one twice. I'm sorry.
The National Security Agency, working with the British government, has secretly been unraveling encryption technology that billions of internet users rely upon to keep their electronic messages and confidential data safe from prying eyes. This is according to published reports yesterday based on internal U.S. government documents. The National Security Agency has bypassed or altogether cracked much of the digital encryption used by businesses and everyday web users. This is according to reports in the New York Times, Britain's Guardian newspaper, and the nonprofit news website ProPublica. The reports describe how the NSA invested billions of dollars since 2000 to make everyone's secrets available for government consumption. In doing so, the NSA built powerful supercomputers to break encryption codes and partnered with unnamed technology companies to insert backdoors into their software. Such a practice would give the government access to users' digital information before it was encrypted and sent over the internet.
In a sharply worded intervention in the debate on the Syrian conflict, Pope Francis also accused world leaders of having stood by and allowed a senseless massacre to unfold in the country. The Pope wrote in a letter delivered to Vladimir Putin but addressed to all the G20 leaders meeting, quote, "To the leaders present, to each and every one, I make a heartfelt appeal for them to help find ways to overcome the conflicting positions and to lay aside the futile pursuit of a military solution." He added, quote, "Rather, let there be a renewed commitment to seek with courage and determination a peaceful solution through dialogue and negotiation of the parties unanimously supported by the international community."
The Transportation Security Administration says flyers in its pre-screening program will soon get expedited security checks at 100 United States airports. 40 airports are already in the pre-screening program. 60 will be added in the next few weeks. Those eligible for the program include U.S. citizens in some airline frequent flyer programs and those in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Trusted Traveler program. Canadian citizens who are in the United States Nexus program are also eligible. The TSA plans to allow other flyers to apply for the pre-screening program later this year. This is from UPI.
And from Bloomberg, Greg and Julie Corbin were shopping for a home in May when interest rates spiked and shrank their budget. Lenore Lennar Corporation persuaded them to pay full price anyway. The Miami-based builder volunteered to cover their loan costs and cut half a percentage point off their interest rate if the couple used its in-house lending unit, Universal American Mortgage Company. The Corbins bought their 4-bedroom home in a suburb of Tampa last month for $213,000, about 50% more than the area's median price. With loan perks they estimated were worth at least $10,000. You just can't beat a deal like that, said 40-year-old Greg Corbin, taking a break from moving boxes into his new house last week. It made our decision easy. And the whole point of that, home builders are using these perks now to defy price cuts.
According to a newly released survey from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, nearly 49 million Americans lived in food-insecure households in 2012. This means that they did not have consistent access to enough healthy food to support all household members. This works out to about 14.5% of households in America, a percentage that has remained largely unchanged since the 2008 financial crisis, while federal spending on food stamps has more than doubled. From 1998 through 2007, by comparison, the percentage of insecure households averaged about 11% from UPI.
The next story is from Washington, D.C. It's from the Los Angeles Times, though. Let's see. U.S. employers added 169,000 jobs in August and much fewer in July than previously thought. The slowdown in hiring could complicate the Federal Reserve's decision later this month on whether to slow its bond purchases. The Labor Department says the unemployment rate dropped to 7.3%, the lowest in nearly 5 years, but it fell because more Americans stopped looking for work and were no longer counted as unemployed. The proportion of Americans working or looking for work fell to its lowest level in 35 years. July's job gains were just 104,000, the fewest in more than a year, and down from the previous estimate of 162,000. Employers have added an average of 148,000 jobs in the past 3 months, well below the 12-month average of 184,000.
This is a story from the BBC. They're speaking about gut bacteria, and that may be an obesity weapon. The human body is teeming with thousands of species of microbes that affect health. A study showed that transplanting gut bacteria from obese people into mice led to the animals gaining weight, while bacteria from lean people kept them slim. The findings were published in Science magazine. Researchers at the Washington University School of Medicine in Missouri took gut bacteria from pairs of twins, one obese, one thin. Mice with the obese twins bacteria became heavier and put on more fat than mice given bacteria from a lean twin, and it was not down to the amount of food being eaten.
Electronic cigarettes are growing in popularity with teenagers. The report says 1 out of 10 American high school students say they have used electronic cigarettes, along with nearly 3% of middle school students, according to a new federal report. That's about double the rate of e-cigarette use in 2011 and translates into 1.78 million children and teens who have tried the battery-powered devices. The sharp increase has public health experts worried. Electronic cigarettes contain the additive chemical nicotine and traces of cancer-causing compounds called nitrosamines. The safety profile of the devices has not been fully studied, according to warnings from the Food and Drug Administration.
President Barack Obama's health care law appears to mirror a trend in job-based insurance, where employees are being nudged into cost-saving plans that require them to pay a bigger share of their medical expenses. 2 independent studies out this week highlighted attractive prices for less generous bronze plans that will offer low monthly premiums, but those plans will require patients to pick up more of the cost if they get sick. Consumers might avoid rate shock over premiums, but some could end up struggling with bigger bills for the care they receive from Obamacare.
Staring at your computer all day is horrible for your eyes. All those brightly colored pixels clashing with the lighting around you is a recipe for eye fatigue and strain. Adhering to the 20-20-20 rule, looking away from your screen every 20 minutes for 20 seconds and focusing on a fixed point 20 feet away and blinking more are good places to start. But you can also make a few quick physical adjustments to your monitor and computer settings to make it easier on your eyes. That actually comes from ABC News.
Primco's Bill Gross, manager manager of the world's largest bond fund, said yesterday afternoon that the global economy has become difficult to stabilize and that investors should seek safety in shorter-dated bonds and inflation-protected treasuries. In his September letter to investors, Gross said central banks' easy money policies have become less effective in generating economic stability and that zero bond interest rates have threatened finance and investment in the real economy. Why invest in financial or real assets if bond prices could only go down and or stock prices could no longer be pumped up via the artificial steroids of QE? He had said this in reference to stimulative policies like the Federal Reserve's $85 billion in monthly purchases of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. This is from Reuters.
And once again, you're listening to News Bites. This is the segment of the morning program that we spend 25 minutes reading to you different news stories from around the world and around the nation and around the state. And we have abbreviated them. We've brought them down to about one paragraph. We take about a minute or so to read them to you and try to squeeze in as many as possible. It is your way to catch up on the biggest news stories, the freshest news stories. Many times, some of these international stories happen just moments before we read them. The next story, anticipating a move by the White House to appease unions, top House Republicans asked Congress's auditors to estimate how much it would cost to provide Obamacare subsidies to workers who use multi-employer health plans. Ways and Means Committee Chairman Dave Camp, Michigan Republican, and Education and Workforce Committee head John Klein, Minnesota Republican, asked the Congressional Budget Office and Joint Committee on Taxation to figure out how much taxpayers would have to provide to offset health premiums tied to these types of plans, which are commonly used by union members. And that was from the Washington Times.
A United Nations treaty entering into force today will extend the labor and social rights of some 53 million domestic workers around the world. From today, the Domestic Workers Convention will be legally binding for signatory countries. The treaty was adopted in 2011 by the International Labor Organization and is the first of its kind. Here's a quote from the director of the International Labor Organization's Working Conditions and Equality Department, Manuel Tomei. Today's entry into force of Convention 189 sends a powerful signal to more than 50 million domestic workers worldwide.
All right, you've been listening to News Bites. We need to wrap it up. Robin, any idea what the count was today? How many news stories did we actually read? By the way, if you'd like to sponsor this program, give WOCA a call, 732-8000. There's a special package that has been prepared by Joe Martone so that if you call about this very segment called News Bites, you'll be treated a little differently. Get some live reads, which we do now and then.
Yeah, 25.
But you can get live reads here and support the show, support the station, call and get your advertising on the entire lineup here on WOCA.
We had 25 today.
25 stories in about 22 minutes, so not bad. All right, we'll take a little break. Jim George is up next. We'll be right back.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA. Ocala.
ABC News Now. I'm Karen Chase. The nation's unemployment rate dropped to 7.3% in August, the lowest level since 2008. But the economy only generated 169,000 new jobs, fewer than expected. Difficult as it may be to believe, more teens are apparently listening to adult advice. The teen birth rate dropped 6% in the past year to the lowest level on record. CDC officials say it's because fewer teens are active and more are using protection. An Arizona woman who spent 20 years on death row could be freed on bail today because her conviction was based on her confession, which is now being called into question. She allegedly confessed to hiring hitmen to kill her 4-year-old son for the insurance money to a lone detective in a closed interrogation room, and his credibility is now in doubt. George Zimmerman's wife is no longer standing by her man. She's filed for divorce, saying he's verbally abusive, selfish, and reckless. Google attorneys say people shouldn't expect their email to be private, as they defended the company in a class action privacy violation lawsuit for scanning Gmail. This is ABC News.
In mid-sized companies, the left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing. When they do, business can take on a whole new rhythm, especially with IBM's Smart Cloud Engage Advanced. It combines communities, web meetings, and file sharing with business-grade email in one security-rich environment, making it the smarter way to collaborate. Register now for your 60-day free trial at ibm.com/engines/engage.
There are leaf blowers, and then there are fuel-injected luxury leaf blowers. The Lincoln Certified Pre-Owned Autumn Event. Now get 0.9% APR, plus the confidence of a 6-year, 100,000-mile comprehensive